And now it's Deborah Cobelt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on Deborah Cobelt Live and also our Little Italy podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome Marianna Gatto. She's the director and founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles and downtown LA. Also wrote the most magnificent book. I haven't been able to put it down. And honestly, I think this is a book that belongs in schools all throughout Los Angeles. The Italian Americans of Los Angeles. And this is an incredibly comprehensive view of Italians in Los Angeles from when they first came to this great city and takes us all the way to present day. It's incredibly well researched, well done. And Mariana, who's also my friend, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Deborah. It's so nice to be back.
Yeah. We've been going through this book, I don't know, throughout the past couple of weeks. And over the weekend, this is how I spent my weekend, going through your book. And from every page I turn, it's more interesting than the one before it, because I didn't even know half of our history here in Los Angeles. And I really hope that a lot of people get a lot out of this book, and not just here in LA and California, but also back east, because off camera, we were talking about how a lot of people back east don't even know the story of Italians in California and Los Angeles. They just know their own story, which is significant, you know, for those who came into New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey. But this is our story here in Los Angeles. I want to start by saying, you know, what motivated you to write this book, Mariana?
Well, I would say there's two reasons primarily. The first is relatively simple. It hadn't been written. Italians began settling in Los Angeles, as you mentioned, 200 years ago. And they have, contributed tremendously. They've shaped the region in so many ways. But their history was largely absent, not only from local histories, like if you went and tried to, you found books about Los Angeles or Southern California, but the Italians of Los Angeles were absent from Italian American histories. And so what I was hoping to do was to really contribute to where there was some scholarship lacking. But the second part of the answer is a little bit more personal. I was born here in Los Angeles, and I've, spent my life here. And growing up, I never really understood how I fit as an Italian American in Los Angeles, how I fit into the Los Angeles mosaic, nor how I fit into Italian America as an Italian from Los Angeles, because again, like, we didn't exist, right?
Right.
I grew up before the information age. If you couldn't discover what the answer that you were looking for by asking somebody or going to a library and doing research, you kind of hit a wall. And so, that was, primarily my reasons to document this community that's vibrant, that's contributed so much to our region, but who's often been overlooked.
Because often history, is muddled as we're taught it, right? I didn't quite realize that when the first Italians came here, they came to Mexico. Can you describe the history?
Yeah, so, Los Angeles is established as a colonial outpost of Spain in 1781. And Mexico later wins its independence from Spain in 1821. And between 1821 and 1848, Los Angeles is part of Mexico. So the first Italians began arriving in 1827, back when Los Angeles was this dusty little pueblo. Interestingly enough, when Italians first arrived here, many of them, spoke Spanish, or learned to speak Spanish before they learned English. That was the
Wow.
Franca of Los Angeles. And because, there's a lot of cultural similarities between Italians and Mexicans, a similar language, the Catholic religion, kind of like that Latin culture. Italians in their early days, they face less prejudice here in Los Angeles than in other parts of the country. And they're able to achieve upward mobility at an earlier time. Many of them, because Italian women didn't start to come here until a bit later, they intermarry with Mexican, or we call them Californio, the women of California before statehood, the California women, some would also intermarry later with like the French community, but there's, it's a little bit of a different history than we see in other parts of the country.
Wow. So, what were some of the positions or jobs rather that the Italians first had when they came here? And also, where did they settle? I believe that there were like 5 or 6 regions, right, where the Italians settled, everywhere from the very south down near the ports all the way up to the very northern part of Los Angeles County. So where did they begin settling, and what types of jobs did they have?
So the earliest, I mean, okay, so we could go back really early,
Sure.
and Italians start coming to Los Angeles in 1827. Again, this is before California statehood. California doesn't become a state till 1850, and this is before the unification of Italy. Some of the earliest, if you want to call them Italians, actually came here as Jesuit missionaries. When we think of the Jesuits, the so-called Spanish missionaries, many of them were actually of Italian ancestry. So, as early as like the late 1600s, there's Italian Jesuits coming to, Southern California, Baja California. And it's actually a Jesuit missionary who plants the first vineyard in Baja California in 1883. It's an Italian, Jesuit missionary who establishes one of the first permanent mission in Baja California. So kind of in the general region. But in terms of like, if we call like the permanent Italians to settle in Los Angeles beginning in the 1820s, most of them are drawn to the region because of agriculture. Right. So at that time, getting to Los Angeles was no easy task. There was not a railroad that connected Los Angeles with the rest of the country. There was not a Panama Canal. So you set sail often from Italy and then traveled around, Cape Horn, Latin America, Central America, and, you worked your way north, or you came by a covered wagon. And that was, an incredibly challenging, dangerous, expensive journey. So to come here, you really needed to know what you were doing. It wasn't an accident. Many of them were drawn by the opportunities to ranch, to fish, to farm, to become winemakers. Interestingly enough, some Italians first settled in Northern California. They were drawn to Northern California during the gold rush. And then from there, they worked their way south. The name Domenico Ghirardelli might ring a bell for you, of course, like the famous Ghirardelli chocolate. Right. He started out in gold country, met up with a friend of his from Genoa, where he was born, by the name of Ambrogio Vignolo. And, they made a little bit of money in gold country. They became merchants, owned a general store. And then Ghirardelli stayed in San Francisco in that area. And then Vignolo came down to Los Angeles, where he became a very prominent, owned a general store. So, in the early days, it was things like farming, fishing, agriculture, viticulture. But then as like time moved on, like into like the early 1900s, you saw Italians drawn here for like, opportunities to work with like the railroad or in manufacturing. As you keep on going, as Hollywood starts to kind of take root here, the motion picture industry, you see Italian artists and craftspeople drawn here. So it really depends on the era. And, of course, we still see Italians coming here today. Many of them are, drawn by opportunities in fashion and cuisine. They represent the brain drain taking place in Italy. But I think you had also asked me about like where they first settled. So yeah, the first neighborhood, the first Italian enclave, if you will, was located in downtown, right where the museum is. So we call that neighborhood the Plaza. And that was kind of this interesting crossroads of Los Angeles, very similar to who we are today, in that, the Plaza was this very multi-ethnic community of Native Mexican, Californios, Chinese Americans, African Americans, Italian Americans, French people, all came together in this little neighborhood. And so that was the earliest. And then there were several others that would pop up. Lincoln Heights, where incidentally, when Frank Capra, the director of It's a Wonderful Life, came to the United States, he lived in Lincoln Heights. So did my family when they came here after World War II. That was one of the largest Italian enclaves. They lived in what was then called Sonora Town, or the North Broadway district. Now we know it as Chinatown. If you've ever driven through Chinatown and asked yourself, what's an Italian church doing in the heart of Chinatown? That's because that neighborhood was originally, was previously an Italian neighborhood. So we said the Plaza, Lincoln Heights, North Broadway district of Chinatown, another neighborhood near downtown called Dogtown. What is now the Arts District was a large Sicilian enclave. And then, of course, San Pedro, south of Los Angeles. Many Italians were drawn there by like fishing and, opportunities to work at the Caneries, that sort of thing.
You mentioned early on winemaking. I want people to just close their eyes for a moment and imagine Los Angeles, not the Los Angeles of today, with the skyscrapers and every road completely paved over. Imagine it some time ago when it was rolling hills. There were a tremendous number of wineries here, right? Could you talk about that?
Yes. So many people, when we talk about winemaking California, our minds all go to like Napa,
Right.
neck of the woods. But the wine industry actually took root in Southern California before Napa. So if you can imagine, the first vineyards are planted in Baja California, and it kind of continues up that way. And all around downtown, like where Union Station is, if you can imagine, like this Terminal Annex Post Office, those were vineyards.
Yeah.
And there were at one time, until Prohibition, upwards of 100 wineries in greater Los Angeles. And then if you kind of continue out from there into places like Rancho Cucamonga, that was a huge winemaking center in Los Angeles. Burbank, you could find, Italians growing wine grapes near where Burbank Airport and Castaways Restaurant are now. And of course, a lot of this disappeared as Los Angeles became more urban. If you've ever been out to the Ontario airport, like part of the runway, like they basically, tore out the vineyards and to expand the airport. And so those were all, vineyard lands. And probably one of the greatest reminders of LA's incredible winemaking legacy is in downtown, two places, the San Antonio Winery, which is over 100 years old and still owned and operated by the same Italian-American family. They survived Prohibition by making sacramental wine for the Catholic Church. And then also, if you've ever walked down Olvera Street, which is right behind the museum, Olvera Street was originally called Wine Street because there were so many wineries in that area. And if you look up as you're walking down Olvera Street, you'll actually see some of the oldest grapevines in the state of California. A few years back, there was a genetic study of these vines, and they were traced to clippings that were presumably brought over here by Jesuit missionaries in, we're talking, hundreds of years ago. And so you see these massive gnarled, what are they, trunks? And depending on the time of year, you'll actually see grapes kind of hanging over you on Olvera Street.
Wow, isn't that beautiful? Such a beautiful history. And you describe it so well. I'm actually picturing it as you describe it, what it must have been like and how, they really brought their home here so that they felt like home. And clearly the climate was very similar, right?
Yes.
Wow, what an incredible history we've had. Let's talk a little bit about the Caneries, right? Were they first started by the Italians as well? And then I have another question right on top of that. The woman's role in terms of the Caneries and what women engaged in when they first came here.
Yes. So some of the canneries were started by Italians, but many of the larger ones were like either, Dalmatian, French, Anglo.
Oh, okay.
But there were some that were Italian operators, or at least one. And you know, the canneries and the fishing industry, especially in places like San Pedro, were some of the largest employers.
Mm.
Many women, you know, their husbands were fishermen, and they went to work in the canneries. That was, you know, just I've heard it described as this tremendous sight every morning of thousands of women leaving their homes and you know, descending upon downtown to board buses to go to the canneries or walk into the canneries. And they would wear these white uniforms that resembled nurses' uniforms. And so these women were nicknamed tuna nurses. And yeah, and you know, I've heard a number of Italian American families in the region describe kind of a similar scene, which was, you know, these women would come home at the end of the day, having worked in the canneries, smelling like fish, and their kids or sometimes grandkids would say, you know, Mom, you know, Nonna, you smell like fish, and they would say that's a smell of money. And you know, really, you know, you think about in places like New York or New Jersey, your family coming from Southern Italy, and the adaptations that they had to make to, you know, to adjust to the climate, to adjust to living in like these oftentimes very congested urban centers. That was very different than their life in Italy. I mean, most of our people were farmers, they were, you know, peasants, they might have had a trade, but most of them were farmers. And
Yeah.
so, you know, they go to places like, you know, New York's Little East Side, where they're living in these cramped, congested quarters, and, you know, very little sunlight. If they're able to maybe grow a little tomato plant on, you know, outside on a fire escape, they're lucky. In California, you know, Italians often kind of were able to continue on with a similar lifestyle than that they had in Italy. And of course, we see how, you know, Italian immigrants uh, made California this agricultural giant, or they helped make California this agricultural giant by basically carrying on with a lot of the traditions from their homeland. And what a wealth, like what an abundanza they gave us. You know, you think about um, some of the, you know, the first folks to grow artichokes as a commercial crop were Italian
Mm.
immigrants in Half Moon Bay in Northern California. You know, all the, you know, some of the non-fish, like when you say canneries, my mind goes to like fishing. You know, canneries that used to exist here in San Pedro, like Starkist.
Mm.
But you know, in Northern California, and I know we're kind of focusing on Los Angeles, so I
No, it's
won't.
fine. It's all part of our history.
You think about canneries like Del Monte, you know, founded by Italian immigrants. You know, you walk down, you walk through the grocery store, and like the influence is all around us. Del Monte, Progresso, S&W, you know, these are all, they don't come off as really outwardly Italian, but they're Italian immigrants behind them.
Wow, that's such an it's so exciting. Must have been an exciting but very draining time for the, you know, we can look back at it as history and think about it as exciting, but you know, the number of hours that they worked, the long, you know, to build something from scratch, from virtually nothing, must have been incredibly challenging. I will say though, they had each other as a community. I often look around at our own communities now and we're so splintered, and people are often very unhappy because of that. And I think, you know, what's missing is a community of people who are growing something together, and that's
Okay.
important, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there's so many studies on that about the linkage between having community and feeling connected and our mental health. And, you know,
Yeah.
we weren't supposed to do this alone. We really,
No.
you know, one of the things I love about working in our community is the tribe that you know, we've created that we feel part of.
Yeah. And let's talk about where you're located. I believe you are in what's called Italian Hall. It was, I believe, the first gathering place in around 1908, correct? Why don't you talk to us about that? Because it's a very important part of the downtown area. It's very exciting building. As soon as you walk in, there's all these little neat, you know, things from, it was a speakeasy, I believe, right? I mean, I think you could say it way better than I can. So please.
So, you know, Italians began settling in here in the 1820s, and because we're this communal people, we're immediately looking for places where we can gather. So some of the early gathering places were people's homes or their ranches, or certainly, the church when St. Peter's and some of the other churches were established. There were a few other community centers that were constructed in the later 1800s, but it's in 1908 that there's this large Italian community centered around the plaza, around what is now like Union Station, Alvarez Street, that general area. And a French woman by the name of Marie Hamel, her husband was a very prominent real estate developer in Los Angeles, and he had passed away, but she was, kind of continued on and was a very astute businesswoman in her own right. She looked around and sees this vibrant, successful Italian community. And she has this property on the corner of North Main and Cesar Chavez. And she says, I'm going to construct a building here for the Italian American community. And she had a little encouragement at the hands of a gentleman by the name of Frank Arconti. And so Italian Hall is constructed in 1908 to serve as a gathering place for the community, and immediately becomes the headquarters of a number of different Italian American organizations. These are the days before things like unemployment insurance, disability benefits. So like if you were to be hurt at work and, unable to return, unless you had savings or people you could borrow from, you were often a bind. And so these organizations known as mutual benefit societies were created to help their members in times of need. Everybody paid dues, and those dues were banked so that if Deborah got injured at work and couldn't go back to, I don't know, the cannery, you had something to fall back on for a little while. And so this Italian Hall becomes really the focal point of the community. It would be where you might hold your wedding reception. If you were a new immigrant to the city, you'd go there in search of work or in search of, other people to kind of connect and network with. And so Italian Hall remains that place until into the 1940s, as the community starts to move on and as there's other community gathering places established. And fast forward to the 1950s, this is when a lot of historic downtown Los Angeles is being bulldozed in the name of progress. And luckily, the state of California had the foresight to preserve this group of historic buildings in downtown, which are now known as El Pueblo Historical Monument. And the Italian Hall is one of them. Over a number of years, and that's a whole nother story, but over a period of years, the foundation behind the museum, raised some of the funds to renovate this building, which was severely dilapidated, had really languished after a number of years of, lack of maintenance and that sort of thing, and established the museum. And that's where the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles is located. So Italian Hall is on the National Register of Historic Places. We say that we're one of the oldest remaining buildings from what was LA's historic Italian enclave.
And it's very important. I know that you will get into what the museum does a little later in our program, but I just want to touch upon this. You do so many educational programs every year, every week for kids. Everything's free of charge, and the programs are smart. They're interesting. You know how sometimes you walk through something and it's like, okay, they're very smart. Can you just touch upon some of what you do for the community in terms of, children and education?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, admission to the museum is free, as are most of the museum's programs. And what became apparent to us almost immediately after opening our doors is, unlike maybe a lot of ethnic museums, most of our audience, more than 80% of our audience, probably closer to 90% of our audience, is not of Italian extraction. So we are faced with the task of, number one, we exist to serve the public. That's our entire, but we realize that in order to engage these incredibly diverse audiences, and I don't mean diverse in terms of only one's heritage, but we literally have people who are 9 and who are 90 and everything in between coming into the museum. People who are English speakers, non-native English speakers. One of our largest group of visitors are K through 12 students. And so we're tasked with making, this information interesting, relevant. Like if people come in your doors and you don't touch them, if they don't have, well, I have to be careful about the words that I use in this day and age, but if you don't leave them impacted, if there's not some kind of an emotional, pedagogical thing that takes place, I feel it's a lost opportunity. I want everybody to walk away having learned something, taking away something. And so that's what we do. We produce and present a variety of programming, everything from, arts and crafts for kids, original plays that we commission, concerts, lectures, film screenings. We try to keep it new and exciting, to keep people coming back. And then of course, the temporary exhibitions that we put on every year are a big part of that.
Yeah, you have a fantastic one right now. If you want to, since we're on the museum, if you want to just very quickly touch upon that.
Sure. So our current temporary exhibition is called Creative Minds, and it's all about Italian-American inventors and innovators. So it profiles about 100 people. Basically, it asks a question. Okay, so, obviously Italy has this tremendous legacy of creativity, everything from musical instruments to the Vespa to, you name it. This exhibition kind of asks the question, are somehow Italians creative by birth? Is there something hereditary about it? Because many of the Italians who came to the United States did not have much formal education, yet they went on to do these incredible things and create, things that are part of our life every day that we often don't realize. And so, we examine that, and this exhibition continues on until early spring. So we hope you have a chance to come down and check it out. Again, it's very fun, and you'll walk away with a lot.
You will. I mean, little things that a lot of people don't know. Mr. Peanut.
Created by a whole section about food, but then there's also like science and mathematics. And one of my personal heroes, Dr. Gallo, who was the first to identify HIV as the cause of AIDS and helped develop some of the early tests and treatments for what was such a huge part of my life growing up when I did. And the legacy of our community is tremendous. And just to be able to kind of examine that and walk away with a little better understanding about, the origin behind even just such like iconic parts of our childhood, like the radio flyer wagon, which was created, the little red wagon created by an Italian immigrant in Chicago.
Yeah, a lot of people do, but a lot of people do not realize that Marconi, he created the radio. Everybody knows the Flintstones, but a lot of folks don't realize Hanna-Barbera, two Italians. That's just like a small glimpse into so much of this exhibit. You almost have to really go more than once. It's pretty terrific. It runs to the end of the year, right?
Yes, until we're actually extending it a little bit. As you know, this has been kind of a challenging year for us in Los Angeles. So yeah, we decided, to let people have a little longer to enjoy it as we gear up for our next exhibit.
Yeah, what will that be? Are you allowed to tell us?
No, I can say. So it's the exhibition is titled Mangia, and it's about the evolution of Italian food in the United States. So basically, we trace the origins of Italian food, what became Italian American food, separate from Italian, from its origins as a cuisine or as foods that were consumed almost exclusively by Italians in their neighborhoods, to what became and is now one of the most popular ethnic cuisines in the nation. We think of pizza as American food. It's become such a deep part of our culture that we forget that it originated on the other side of the Atlantic. And so you know, we're looking at everything from, you know, the farms to the table to now, you know, some of the most popular, highly coveted restaurants, or I should say reservations in the city. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. What a lot of people don't realize about Italian food is very simple. The ingredients are simple. They're just incredibly fresh. You know, you
Yes.
pick them and you put them in your food. And we too can do that as Americans.
Yes.
We don't really have to have 40 ingredients when really maybe you just need three. That's
Yes.
it. I mean, this should be very interesting, Mariana. I really look forward to it very much.
It's gonna be great. We're gonna have a lot of delicious programs attached to it.
Oh, I figured so. I mean, how could you not? Right? I can't even. So that's a reason to go alone. You'll be very well fed when you go to the museum and for your new exhibit. I want to get back to the book a little bit, and a lot of this also is covered in your museum, but way more in depth in the book. So many well-known Italians are behind something like Bank of America. I didn't even know that until the first time I went to your museum. But then you talk more about that also in the book. I'll have you touch on him in a moment. You mentioned Frank Capra. And in fact, how that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, may in fact have been based on the founder of the Bank of America. Like there's so many incredible connections. You know, the voice of Snow White. Of course, we all know Francis Ford Coppola, the Russo brothers, famous Italians who built, you know, some of the most incredible hotels, the Biltmore. So, can you touch upon some of the highlights in the book that folks might be familiar with?
Well, I mean, there's, I think, a lot of people that you will discover for the first time. There's going to be a lot of names that are might not be as familiar, but who are
Okay.
fascinating figures nonetheless.
Mm.
And I think, you know, some people that our community could really start to embrace a little bit more as maybe I would say heroes, but as people who impacted the way we live, and really like the nation as a whole, not only, you know, Italian Americans. For instance, you know, somebody that I almost guarantee that nobody's heard of is Alfred Paonessa. He was a Superior Court justice here in Los Angeles, and he was born in New York to Italian immigrants, came out here in the 1920s, appointed to the bench in early 30s. And during the 1940s, as the Ku Klux Klan starts to get very powerful here in Los Angeles again, they were operating as a charitable organization at that time. He basically rules that they are not a charitable organization, and revokes their charter in the state of California. You know, so, you know, not we kind of, when we think about like civil rights, you know, his name never comes to mind because again, he's one of these forgotten folks. Incidentally, he was also one of the first to strike down what were called restrictive covenants. These were like basically legal language that was included on the deeds to properties, like residential properties, that said who could live there and who couldn't. And the Supreme Court would strike those down later, but he was one of the first to really kind of start chipping away at them. But then there's like a lot of folks that I think are going to be more familiar to folks, of course, when we talk about like the entertainment industry. You mentioned the voice of Snow White, Adriana Casalotti. She was a local girl who Disney had heard, you know, audition, and he selected her immediately. There's, you know, just so many people who have shaped Los Angeles. You think of like John Ferraro, who is one of our longest serving city council members in
Right.
Los Angeles. He was integral to the, you know, the downtown renaissance, the development of the Staples Center, which is now, of course, a cryptocurrency.com arena, right? You know, Sabato Rodia, who built single-handedly over a, you know, almost 4-decade-long period, the Watts Towers, which if you've never
Right.
visited, you know, I mean, they're considered one of our nation's finest works of folk art. And these are really just like inspirational. Some of these towers stand at 100 feet, and he used just his sheer strength. This is a man who was only 4 feet 11 tall, and he had basic tools. He would, assemble these towers out of recycled objects, no engineering training, no formal training. And as he scaled these towers, 100 feet into the air, he used like basically a belt, like a ordinary belt, to strap himself to the towers so he wouldn't fall. And I'll just say, one last thing about him. When at one time the city wanted to demolish these towers, and there was a fight to save them. And, there was a criticism, well, these towers, they were assembled without any permits or plans, or this guy, no engineering background. They did a structural test on the towers, and they learned that they could withstand hurricane strength winds. Here's this man who literally has probably a first grade education at best, and he created this monument. Again, we think about the Watts Towers. We don't associate them with an Italian American immigrant, but what a fascinating figure, and what an amazing, work of art that he left for us.
And in recent decades, so many of the engineers have been involved in JPL, Northrop Grumman, right? Can you touch upon that a little bit as well? Because you're right. Very often people will think of Italians as art, food, theater, opera, but I mean, it's so vast and comprehensive, right?
Yes, I mean, we're often, I think, we're pigeonholed often as Italian Americans, and a few, it's just assumed that we must be in the food industry, and there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of us are in the food industry. We love feeding the nation and making life a lot tastier. But we're also, trailblazers in so many other fields today as well. I think of a friend of mine over at Loma Linda University, Daniel De Lorenzo, who is a scientist specializing in movement disorders. He's done a lot of incredible work with helping folks who with seizures and detecting seizures, and our work continues to this day. With this exhibition, we're collaborating with the Italian American Scientists and Scholars of North America. And just like you mentioned, like from at JPL, every major university, and even some of the smaller ones in the area, you find Italian American scholars, and we're everywhere, in short.
Yeah. What is your goal with the book? I mean, I really mean it. This should be something that we have in many of our, not just, lower schools. And by that, I mean, middle school, high school, but certainly even in our universities. I mean, I just think that would be terrific. But where do you see this book? Because it's not just informative. It's super interesting. My husband is full-blown Polish, and he can't get enough of this book, but he feels that way about your museum as well. He goes there and he's like, gosh, I had no idea. And I'd be like, told you, because I always tell him all these stories about our heritage, and I'm like, I told you. But this is, please tell me about, where you'd like to see this.
I mean, whenever you write something, your hope is that it engages, it enlightens, it informs. We don't go into publishing for money, at least not this type of book. I mean, there's no money in it. There's, if I break even at some point, that will be great. But really, my hope is that people walk away with a greater understanding of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a city that has, for most of its history, kind of embraced a fairy tale about its origins and promoted that fairy tale. And I feel it's a great shame that really the only time we learn local history here in Los Angeles, Southern California, is in the 4th grade, typically, unless you happen to take a class maybe in college. But the idea that Los Angeles is the 2nd largest city in the United States, and it has shaped the world. But most people are ignorant of its origins, including many Angelenos themselves. And so my hope was to kind of do what I could to address that. And then also, Italian Americans, especially in recent years, have often been lumped into a history that they were never part of. The history of race in the United States is often described in like these very binary black and white terms, but there's a lot of gray area. And to learn about, kind of the history of race and ethnicity in the United States, there's so much that I think can enlighten and inform us during these times. And again, when it comes to like the Italian American world, one of the things I really enjoy as kind of an Italian American sociologist, if you will, is going to little different parts of the country where there are historic Italian communities. And I'll kind of backtrack by saying, most of our ancestors came here as economic refugees. We came because we were starving and because there were opportunities in America. And we went wherever there was work. So my Sicilian side came in through New Orleans. They cut sugarcane in that area for 2 seasons before continuing west to Colorado, where the steel industry beckoned. Wherever there was a need for cheap labor in the United States, you typically find a historic Italian American community. And I love going to these places, places like Clarksburg, West Virginia. They have this fantastic Italian festival every year. I was in Omaha, Nebraska last year for the 100th anniversary of the Santa Lucia Festival.
Oh, wow.
And, I met the granddaughter of the founder of the festival, the foundress. And to see, these Italian American communities that are historic, that are still kind of connected to their traditions. I often describe Italian America as this big tent. And regardless of whether we live in Des Moines or in Denver or in Los Angeles or in Louisiana, there's a place for all of us under that tent.
Yeah.
And we're more inclusive in the way that we kind of project or describe Italian American history. I mean, look, numerically, the majority of Italians settled on the East Coast in places like New York, Boston. And yes, nobody's discounting any of that, but our history is so much larger than many of us many of us know. And so it was also my hope to kind of, again, like contribute to this understanding of Italian Americans.
Yeah. There's quite a few Italian Americans who also settled in the very northern part of California, like around Mount Shasta, and they were really big into the logging industry. I found that out because my son worked up there for the federal government at one point, and he said, "Mom, there's a lot of Italians up here," and there was a much older woman who wrote a book about that as well, about the Italians and so honestly, to your point, we're sort of everywhere. And we're part of the fabric of America. Just one small thing I wanted to ask you before I let you go is if you could elaborate a little more about St. Peter's Church here in Los Angeles. It's such a magnificent place, a magnificent gathering place. And I know it's also close to your heart too.
Yeah. So in the early 1900s, our bishop here in Los Angeles, Bishop Caneries, was you saw the Italian American community growing. And like the Catholic Church did in other parts of the country, they were often, kind of worried that if you don't serve this community in the way that they're used to celebrating, expressing their religious traditions, you often lose them. And at least that was the case here in Los Angeles. So Bishop Caneries orders the construction of 2 churches. One of them was Immaculate Conception, which has kind of been my obsession. That was in the east side, like now the Arts District, and St. Peter's. Now St. Peter's is located again in what is now Chinatown. It was then known as the North Broadway District. And the original St. Peter's was located on a former cemetery grounds. Actually, in the original church was a memorial chapel for a very wealthy Angelino. And so really from like 1904 onward, St. Peter's becomes this very important religious cultural heart for the Italians of Los Angeles. And the church still exists today. If you're ever looking to attend Italian Mass or experience some of our Italian feasts in Los Angeles, like the Feast of St. Joseph, it's one of the largest in the region. We put on one of the largest St. Joseph's tables in the region. but also like all the, traditional feasts that you might see in places like, the East Coast or wherever, these Italian saints that are belong to the towns from where many of the immigrants hailed. We have a large community from Puglia around the city of Bari in Los Angeles. So a lot of these Barese saints, San Trifone, Madonna della Stella, Madonna di Costantinopoli. And the church puts on these beautiful feast celebrations that often, include a mass, a procession where they, march with the saint statue around the block, followed by a banquet and dancing. And so if you're looking to connect with the community, whether you're Italian or not, whether you're Catholic or not, St. Peter's welcome.
Right. Yeah, absolutely magnificent place. As soon as I walk in, I feel like I'm home. So thank you for discussing that as well. And you said early on that you wanted to know more about yourself and you're in this entire landscape of Los Angeles. By being the founder of this museum and the writer of this incredible book, Italian Americans of Los Angeles. Have you accomplished that, Marianna?
Yes. I mean, listen, this book is published. It's, it's like giving birth, right? Now
Yeah.
it's filed out in the world. But I mean, gosh, I'm still learning things, all the time.
Yeah.
I look forward to the updated edition of the book. There's certain things that I will include and maybe subtract. And there's so much more. I think still, thank you for saying that it was well researched and, all that. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
I know that there's more that can be included. And I think like I kind of unscrambled a little bit of the Rubik's Cube of, my own personal family story, how we ended up here. That was really one of the motivating questions, right? Why I'm here is, who are we? Who am I? How did we get here? And what is this part inside of me that is drawn to my heritage that I can't ignore? And, I think oftentimes our vocations present themselves to us when, as we're coming up, as we're developing. And, mine kind of stared me in the face. I didn't really understand it. I didn't understand how, I'd really be able to make it work. But 20 years later,
here we are.
Here we are.
I'm grateful to that curious little kid, Marianna. So thank you.
Thank you. Bless you.
Very grateful.
For all your support of the Italian American of Los Angeles and for, shining a spotlight on my book.
It's very important to all of us, not just Italians or Italian Americans. And by the way, people, you can donate. So just go on the website of the museum.
Yeah, you can find the website, you can find the book on the museum's website or on Amazon. And then my website is mariannagatto.com.
Yeah, I'd love to have a reading at this part of town where I live. Invite some of our Italian friends. It would be great. I really am such a big fan of the book. I really am.
Thank you.
We should talk about that. And I believe for those watching this podcast in real time, you're appearing somewhere tonight. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So tonight I'll be at the Garibaldina Society, which is in Northeast LA, just north of downtown, kind of between downtown and Pasadena. Garibaldina Society is the oldest Italian American society in Los Angeles. It was originally founded in 1877, right at the plaza, and they met actually at the Italian Hall before their later clubhouses were built. So tonight, this event is free. If you just Google Garibaldina Society, you can get all the information about how to RSVP and where it's located and all that good stuff. And so I'll be talking there, and you can get the book there tonight too as well.
Yeah, you guys, that's a great place too. They have a lot of fun events. Food is terrific. Such fun, friendly people. You don't have to be Italian to go there. In fact, I've been there for quite a few events, and plenty of people at our table were not. Lots of dancing. It's just really a great place. So that should be a lot of fun tonight, Marianna. So thanks for telling us about that. And everybody, you can find my conversation with Marianna Gatto on Little Italy podcast and also Deborah Cobelt Live. And we are on YouTube. We will later record this on Facebook or put it on Facebook. And then as an audio version, our podcast is on iHeart, just about anywhere that you get your podcast. Just put in Little Italy podcast and Marianna Gatto, and you'll find our conversation. My name is Deborah Zara Cobelt, and it's really been my pleasure to welcome Marianna here and to have you all join us. Please tell your friends as well. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.